a hint of what used to be here in Melbourne, and these are the actual plants we think that were here.
So what I look for is bits of land that are just disregarded, covered with rubbish, no one wants to do anything with.
Gerard Morell, one of my students, independently came up with the idea he'd like to revegetate some of the sites around Melbourne. He enlisted his fellow students and myself to come and help plant out this site, and it was a very much a derelict waste sort of site with rubbish, weeds. Gerard's part of the Conservation and Land Management program. He's still doing that. He's still one of my students today, and he's come back kindly, and he's very enthused to sort of work with these other students from RMIT from a completely different program, and they're here going to do some work together. There's a bit of a new idea on how to work together across programs.
Me and a couple of my fellow students were pretty keen to start putting into practice what we were learning and get our hands dirty. I had some connections with Trades Hall here, and I asked if they were doing anything with this vacant area of land covered with rubbish and if we could plant it up, and they said yeah, and they offered to pay for the plants and the mulch, whatever else we needed. So in 2007, I think, me and what ended up being all the students in my class plus the teachers came out and planted it on one sunny day like this, and a couple of years later this is the result. So there are a couple of things we were trying to do. One, as I said, was we were just trying to get some practical experience of planting. Secondly, we wanted to just have a go at restoring a bit, even just a little tiny bit, of what Melbourne might have looked like before European settlement. So putting in all the Indigenous, what we call ground story plants, because Melbourne before settlement would have been a mix of trees and bushes obviously, but lots and lots of flowering plants and grasses which have now been largely lost. We also learnt about what kind of plants work and what don't. I think there's a temptation when people are trying to restore natural landscapes is to go through the plant books and look at the lists of the plants that used to be in Melbourne and say, oh, here's a nice one, chocolate lily, that's beautiful, smells lovely, let's put those in. But this is a tiny little plant that's really vulnerable and gets stomped on or just crushed by the first piece of rubbish. So what we learnt over the period as these were getting established was what was tough, what survived, what could cope with vandalism or exposure, and what didn't. So what we've got here, really, there's been a bit of a natural selection process. What we've got here is tough, resilient native plants that can kind of survive in an urban environment. Plants have their own really useful role to play in keeping urban temperatures down, the urban heat island effect as it's known, and also filtrating stormwater, a whole series of useful things like that, apart from just making people feel better about being in the city because there's vegetation. So in here you've got common everlasting, which is Chrysocephalum apiculatum, beautiful thing. Then in here you've got, I think it's Austral pelargonium or Austral storksbill, beautiful little pink flowers. Creeping in amongst everything here is clematis, native clematis, Clematis microphylla. Up behind us, this nice dark green bush is Coria. It's native fuchsia, as it's sometimes known. These beautiful little blue flowers, that's flax lily, spreading flax lily, Dianella admixta, I think. And this here, coming into seed, is wallaby grass, or Ostreodanthonia. You can see its little fluffy little seed heads. And this is, even though it's not showy like a flower, it's really significant to me because this is the plant, and with other grasses like it, that once covered millions and millions of hectares around Melbourne, especially western Melbourne. And you could argue that this grass and the other grasses like it, so kangaroo grass and spear grass and so on, this is what attracted the first settlers to Victoria, because here was a nutritious grass that grew really well in low rainfall conditions that was just waiting for all these sheep to come and eat it. So you could argue this is what kicked off the state of Victoria.